Hello and welcome to today's European SharePoint Office 365 and Azure Community webinar. My name is Shane and I'm delighted to be joined by Erica Telly, MVP Erica Telly LLC USA, who will be talking to you today about how to manage the content lifecycle in Office 365. Remember to join in the conversation about today's webinar on Twitter. Our Twitter handle is @EuropeanSP and our hashtag is ESPC20. Don't forget to check out the Resource Center. This is updated daily with the latest blogs, ebooks, webinars, and how-to videos. Simply visit sharepointeurope.com and click the content link at the top. Interested in taking part in ESPC 20 in Amsterdam this November? Call for speakers is now open at sharepointeurope.com, where you will also find details of our 30% discount offer, which ends tomorrow, Thursday, the 27th of February. After the webinar, we will have a questions and answers session. Type any questions you have in the questions window. Questions will be selected and answered at the end of the presentation. This webinar will be recorded and added to the Resource Center, where you'll be notified by email when it is available. And now I'm going to pass you over to our webinar presenter Erica Telly. Hello, Erica.
Hi, good afternoon. Thanks for having me.
And thank you for joining us so early, Erica. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Well, thank you everybody for joining the webinar today. Here's what we're going to talk about. Here's a basic example of a content lifecycle. So creating content, coordinating with your colleagues and external users, protecting that content with security and compliance features, and then harvesting the knowledge from your organization. And then for each phase in this life cycle, we'll talk about what you can do now, today, to manage the content life cycle, but also what you're going to be able to do later based on the exciting announcements that came out from Microsoft Ignite and other areas. And then also for each area, we always need to keep in mind governance, security, compliance, and how to manage knowledge. So with that, let's dive right into it. So this is an example content services lifecycle. Of course, everybody has their own version of this, but I'm just using the one Microsoft provided. So if you want to check it out, you can visit the source here. So in the first phase, you create, collect, and classify the documents you need to get work done. Then in the next phase, that's where you're really working with your colleagues to share the content, you're co-authoring, you're discussing how to get work done or the content of the documents. You're working with taxonomy, maybe working with Power Apps and Flow. And then next in the protect phase, that's where you're really making sure that you're meeting the needs of your organization from both a security standpoint, but also from a compliance standpoint. And then finally, now that we've done all of that great work to capture knowledge and information, we want to see how we can analyze, reuse that, make sure it's available in search, and properly dispose of content so that our Office 360 environment doesn't get stale. So that's a lot. I kind of think of it in a little more simplified way. So the first two phases are really focused on productivity and governing your information. The protect phase is really about the security and compliance features. And then the last phase is about knowledge management, which is really kind of a new area for Microsoft. We've all tried to do knowledge management in the past, but it's had varying levels of success. At Ignite, they announced Project Cortex, which is really focused on this knowledge management pillar. So we'll be talking about that quite a bit at the end of the presentation. So let's start with our create phase. So in our create phase, we're trying to do two things. First, we want to get content into Office 365. That could be by importing it from other locations, migration, Or it could be as simple as clicking the Create button in a document library. And then we want to automate the extraction of metadata in this phase so that we're able to find the content easily right from the start. So let's look at how we do this. So first, when we import or create content, it might be coming from multiple sources or in various formats. We're not just creating Office documents anymore. We're not just making PowerPoints and Word documents. What we're doing now is recording meetings, maybe have audio files, other types of video. There's so many formats now we can work with in Office 365. Like last year, they added CAD files, which was huge. So once that's imported, we then want to be able to tag the content, organize it, and most importantly, find it when we want. I mean, how many times have you heard the complaint that you can't find anything in SharePoint and you don't know where anything is? How can we prevent that? Well, that's how the picture really is today. But then in the future with Project Cortex, we'll be able to do these same steps, but really at a more automated level. So when we import our content, we'll be able to use AI and machine learning to better classify and extract metadata and context about the document without the end user having to take any actions. And then we'll be able to get insights and analytics on how people are classifying content, how they're using it, so that we can then better hone how we're doing the first two steps. So we can make it more powerful and more impactful to daily work. So let's look at what we can do today. So how can we import our content into Office 365? Well, first of all, if we're talking about documents, we have a few options. SharePoint, there's a free SharePoint migration tool for on-premises SharePoint to online migrations, as well as for file shares. And then last year, Microsoft announced the acquisition of Mover, which is a migration tool that specializes in moving content from third-party sources such as Box, Dropbox, Google Drive, etc. Then a lot of people aren't aware that they might have fast track benefits. So fast track is a services program that Microsoft provides where you can get guidance and best practices around how to prepare, execute, and run your migration. And in a lot of cases, they'll actually do the migration for you. So before you embark on any type of a migration, please double check your fast track benefits by just going to fasttrack.microsoft.com and logging in with your organizational account. If you would like to use the free SharePoint migration tools, you can just log in to the SharePoint Admin Center. Of course, you need to have access, but really you need to have SharePoint Admin Center access to run a migration anyway, so makes sense. On the left-hand side, there's a navigation item for migration, and there you can see the different options for migration, and you can go ahead and get started with those. Well, we're talking about Office 365, not just SharePoint. So what about Exchange files? How can you get those into Office 365? So this scenario comes up a lot of times when maybe people have PST files sitting on a file share somewhere that aren't in active use, but you need to have them around for either discovery purposes or for retention purposes. So if that's your case and you want to leverage the great features available in the Office 365 Compliance Center, there's two options. So number one, if you have a lot of files, you can actually put them on a hard drive and ship it to Microsoft. And for free, they will import those PST files into Office 365. Or if it's a lesser amount, there's an import tool that you can use and run to upload those files to Office 365. So to do that, you would go into the Microsoft 365 Compliance Center. On the left-hand side, click on the Information Governance navigation item, the Import tab, and then here is where you would actually run the import jobs if you're doing it yourself, or if you would like to ship the drives, you can click on this help article to get those instructions. All right, so now that our content is in Office 365, let's talk about how we can organize and tag the content. So our first option, of course, is our tried and true tag content manually. Now, this has had varying levels of success in actual projects, so it may or may not work for your situation. I find that this works really well if users maybe have one choice that they have to make, but once you're asking them to fill out, 2 or 3 or more types of metadata on a piece of content, uh, the likelihood of them doing that drops off significantly. If you have some custom development capabilities, today you can classify content using some of the Azure Cognitive Services capabilities. You could also use IBM Watson or other type of competitor offerings as well. There's also third-party tools you can buy that have developed solutions for SharePoint that use these services, but are more of a plug and play option if you don't want to customize your own solution. So if you'd like to tag content manually, of course, we all know we go into a SharePoint document library and we can select the metadata and then save it. And now it's available for our end users to view and use. If you'd like to look at some of the Azure Content Services capabilities, I'm just here in the Azure portal. I just searched for cognitive services, and there's a lot of options available. I highlighted in red some of the options that are particularly useful for working with content in Office 365. But if you're interested in this, talk to your development team and see how you might be able to integrate some of these solutions into your SharePoint environment. The other thing people often aren't aware of is the Power Automate AI Builder. So this does require the more expensive Power Automate license, but if you have that, you can do things like process forms to pull out metadata values from structured form content. You can, they're starting to build some modules around automatically importing metadata from business cards, recognizing certain texts. This is really a kind of an up and coming area, and you can see a lot of them are in preview today. But go ahead and check out the AI Builder capabilities if you're using Power Automate in your organization. So then another option is to use metadata and apply it using locations. So having it automatically tag things that are put into a document library or a folder, or you could use workflow. So the formerly known as Flow solution, now known as Power Automate, you can use that to complete metadata in a library. So this has been the default column values. They have been around since I think SharePoint 2010. But basically you go into library settings, you click default column values, and then for any column, you can put in a default value. So let's say that you have a document library that has a folder for each one of your project phases. When somebody puts a document into the initial phase folder, it'll automatically fill that metadata out for them. So super easy way to save your users some time and reduce user error. The other thing is, here is an example of a flow that I built to track bugs. So at the end of my flow, I wanted it to update some metadata and column values in a SharePoint list automatically. And so I was able to use one of the actions in Flow in order to fill that metadata out automatically. So that's also an option for something you can do today. And that's available, I think, with the very basic Flow license, or the one that's free with Office 365, actually. So later, as a part of Project Cortex, we'll be able to use that AI builder available in Power Automate directly in SharePoint document libraries. So we'll have this AI builder action on the tab here. And when you upload documents, it can extract the metadata and automatically populate the columns. If we have time at the end of the presentation, then we'll go ahead and show you a more detailed demo about how it's done. But it's, frankly, pretty easy. It's really a truly no-code solution where you're just selecting the fields, showing what type of metadata it should be, and then mapping it to a column in a SharePoint library or list. So later on, we'll also have something called Azure LUIS, Language Understanding Model. This will also be a custom development option where you'll be able to pull metadata or context from very unstructured documents. So instead of it having to be a very structured form, like a purchase order, where the fields are always in the exact right place or the exact same place, you'll be able to use this machine teaching option to teach a machine learning model what information is important to your organization. So the idea is you'll upload a bunch of documents, LUIS will analyze them, and then you'll go through and decide yes or no, did LUIS classify them appropriately? When you say no, you'll teach them what the right values were instead, and then over time and iterations, the machine learning model will learn what the correct metadata and context is. Now, you could do a whole session on just this, but I wanted to let you know that it is something that's going to be available very soon. All right, so now let's move on to the next phase in our life cycle. So this is our area where we're more collaborating with people. So here we want to enforce consistency in metadata, and we're going to enable other solutions by categorizing content and adding additional context to it. So in this phase, it's important to understand the Microsoft graph. So the Microsoft graph is something that sits kind of hidden behind Office 365, where it's looking at the actions that your end users are taking across Office 365, and it's building a graph of connections between them. So for example, the Microsoft graph knows that Jane Doe scheduled a meeting with her 5 teammates because that was scheduled in Exchange and through Outlook. She knows who actually showed up to the meeting because it was a Microsoft Teams meeting and everybody joined through the Microsoft Teams link. They can tell what PowerPoint presentation was presented. They can tell that it was recorded through Stream and then automatically transcribed. So they can tell who was talking about what. And that helps you build a relationship between people, tasks, and things that are happening in Office 365. Now, to be clear, this graph is unique to your organization. It's private and it's not shared with anybody else outside, like with other tenants or other customers. So it's something that can be really useful down the road. So Microsoft is going to continue to innovate and provide artificial intelligence solutions in the years to come. And you'll be able to get the most value from those solutions by adding as many signals to the Microsoft graph as possible. So that's a benefit of standardizing on the Office 365 platform. I mean, obviously you don't have to, but later down the road, a year, 3 years, 5 years from now, you'll see more and more benefit from having all your content in Office 365. So as an example, sorry, I forgot to change the heading. This is Microsoft Stream, where I've recorded a video, and in this video, Office 365 has analyzed what individual was talking and at what points, so I can move this bar to hear what they were saying at that time. It's also automatically created a transcript for the meeting. So you can see what's being said, and that's now searchable. And we have this additional context now around the video. Another thing we're able to do is document conversations in Microsoft Teams. So if you have a document in Teams, you can actually chat about it and add additional context to the document that way so that the graph gets signals about how you collaborate with your teammates. You could do this on other items as well, really anything that's a tab in Microsoft Teams. So then another thing you can do to enforce consistency in metadata and classification is use the managed metadata service or the term store. Now, this has been around since SharePoint 2010, and it hasn't really been updated since then. But as part of the Project Cortex announcement, Microsoft said that they will also be updating the term store and the content type gallery. So if you haven't invested in your structured metadata in a while, it's totally worth it to do that now. They've been very clear that anything you do now today will work perfectly in the new solution as well. So for those of you that aren't familiar with managed metadata or the term store, it allows you to create structured metadata or a taxonomy for your organization. So oftentimes people will create, say, a list of all of the offices in their organization or all the products, or just anything else that's metadata that people are going to reuse over and over again. By structuring it in the term store, you're able to enforce consistency in how things are spelled, how they're capitalized, so that then they're consistent when people search for them or when that information is being surfaced in an Office 365 solution. Content types are containers that you can apply to documents. For example, a common example would be a contract. So you might have a contract that always uses the same document template. It should always have these three metadata fields filled out for that contract. You always want to have an approval workflow that goes along with the contract content type. You always want to retain contracts for 7 years in your organization. So those are the types of things that you can attach to the content type container in order to force consistency in contracts across your organization. So again, as a part of Project Cortex, we're going to be able to get a refreshed content type gallery that works better with the new modern architecture of SharePoint with hub sites and subsites, or sorry, hub sites and associated sites to that hub. So for example, this is a little bit small, but if we create a new site content type, we'll go ahead and fill out the information about it. And then at Ignite, they showed this screenshot with the publish to hub sites button. And it says if you publish a content type to a hub site, it ensures that it's added to all the lists and libraries in the hub and in its associated sites. So if you had a set of content types that was applicable to your finance organization, you can publish that to the finance hub site, and then all of the associated sites to that finance hub would also get the content types, and it would appear in their lists and libraries. So again, create it once in the content type hub or the managed metadata store, and then push it out consistently across all your sites. So next, let's go ahead and look at the protect section of the content lifecycle. So this is where we're really looking at the security and compliance features. So that means that we want to find and classify sensitive information, such as personal information for GDPR purposes. It could be bank account numbers. It could be passport numbers, really anything that's probably needs to be a little bit more protected than your average everyday data. This is also where we want to enable retention of data, but also enforce deletion of data so that content doesn't get stale over time. So for example, we can classify the sensitivity of documents right there in the Office client. So here's a Word document. And then over here, since I'm using sensitivity labels in the Compliance Center, I can tag this document as confidential, public, personal, highly confidential, or just general content. That tag of the sensitivity of the document then follows that document anywhere it goes. So if somebody downloads it to their computer, if they put it in a OneDrive and then move it to a SharePoint library, that classification stays with the document, and it's actually metadata on the document. You can also do things to enforce protections. So for example, if you mark a document as confidential, you could enforce encryption, so making sure that document's always encrypted. You could prevent it from being downloaded offline, prevent it from being opened on a mobile device, or a wide variety of protections can follow that label. This is an example of where you would create those sensitivity labels. So you go to the Microsoft 365 Compliance Center, click on the Information Protection area, and that's where you can create and configure these sensitivity labels. I also should mention that sensitivity labels can now also be used in SharePoint, Office 365 groups, and Teams, Microsoft Teams areas. So if you classify a Teams as confidential, for example, then you can say that Teams can never be shared with external users and enforce other types of protections as well. So then the other side of the security and compliance area is, of course, retention and deletion. So there's a couple options for retaining data, but they all come down to applying a retention schedule to a piece of content. So that means that you can say contracts should never be deleted before 7 years has passed. Or you could say Teams chats should never be kept longer than 30 days. Another popular option I see is that people don't want any email to be kept longer than 3 years. So you would use retention policies to both prevent content from being deleted or enforce that it is deleted. But it's also a way to add another piece of metadata to our content, because a retention label is just another field in a document library's or in a document's metadata. So here is an example of some documents I have in the library. In fact, it's the ones we manually tagged earlier. And then I also applied a retention label as well. Now, we also have the ability to use machine learning for retention purposes, for either applying a sensitivity label or a retention label to content. So there's classifiers that are now available in the Office 365 Compliance Center. Actually last December, when I presented this at ESPC, it was not released yet, but actually 2 weeks ago, they released the public preview of these classifiers. So if you have an E5 license, then you can go ahead and go in the Compliance Center and start using these classifiers now. So this is an example of the Compliance Center, and then I've clicked on the data classification and then clicked on trainable classifiers. Now, Microsoft has provided some common types of classifiers. Ones that are most useful to us would be finding all resumes for, data subject request purposes or protecting the PII data. And then also source code, because oftentimes that's considered business critical information. So when you use one of these classifiers, it'll actually scan all of the content in Office 365 and finds and find what it thinks is a resume or a source code, and then tag it as with the label that you choose. Now, you can also create your own trainable classifier. So if we wanted to train a model to identify a contract and then apply a label, we can totally do that. You'll need to have example documents, usually 300 or so, of what a contract looks like in your organization. And then you teach that model what a contract looks like. So you saw a whole list of pre-built classifiers. So the ones that are more useful for retention and deletion and sensitivity are resumes and source code. And then there's other areas of the Compliance Center that we won't get into today in this presentation around monitoring communications for really bad things that you can use classifiers for as well. All right, so then our last pillar is kind of the most exciting because it's all the Project Cortex information. This is all the cool new stuff that's going to be coming later this year. I think at Ignite, they said it would be coming in the first half of 2020. I would guess that means more like June than next month, but who knows? So there's really three things that we're trying to do in our harvest phase of the content lifecycle. So the first is identifying where information is located. So that's enhancing search. Search is enhanced by having additional context on a document and metadata. So all the things we already did in the previous phases. That then increases findability. So where is the knowledge that you're looking for, but also the knowledge that you don't, which is really where we get into some of those new Project Cortex features. And then we're looking at knowledge capture. So that could be both someone writing it down, but also the tacit knowledge, which exists more in people's minds and was gained through their experience. So it's not something that's easily captured. So as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, if you really want to increase the reusability of content in your organization, go ahead and use all of the great features available in Office 365 to capture both the structured content, but also the tacit knowledge, the things that are in people's heads by using these features. That's going to inform the Microsoft Graph and then feed the personalization of other features. So here's an example of a common situation in organizations where somebody has a question. So a new feature of Yammer is the question post type. So I selected question at the top. I typed in my question. My colleague is going in there and answering the question. They're posting a potential answer. Maybe some other people posted answers too, but I can go and reply, of course, but I can also mark it as the best answer. So now what you've told the knowledge graph is, here's a question somebody asked, and not only do we have the answer, but a human being has decided this is the best answer. So that then creates a Q&A knowledge base in your organization, and the graph knows not only the questions and answers, but who's a member of that Yammer community. So that's the people where the Q&A is the most relevant to them, and who the subject matter experts are in the organization. So by using this feature, you're actually adding a lot of knowledge into the graph. So then another one that I mentioned earlier is using Stream. So if you record your meetings where people are often they're often talking about the tacit knowledge that only exists in their heads, and then when you record that meeting using Microsoft Teams, it's actually uploaded to Stream and a transcript is created. So now you have that tacit knowledge out of people's heads. All they had to do was speak in a meeting, and now you have a text version of that tacit knowledge in your organization. So this is a really important one for really kind of harvesting the knowledge in your organization. Okay, so now let's get into how this pays off. So Project Cortex. So one of the main features of Project Cortex is the ability to identify topics in your organization. So this is really playing to that scenario where you want to find knowledge that you didn't know that you needed necessarily. Maybe you're a new employee, maybe you just switched teams, or if it's anything like my team at work, there's just stuff going on. There's just so much projects going on that I'm not always up to date about all of them because I'm maybe not directly working on it, but a colleague is, and I just want to get some information. So what Project Cortex does is it mines and takes a guess at what the important topics are in your organization. So for example, on this page, which is a modern SharePoint page, you can see Project Juno, the Falcon Core team. And when I scroll over one of those items, there's a AI generated topic card. On the card, I can see what people are involved with the project, related projects. And if I click on it, I get an AI generated page that has an overview of the project that maybe it pulled from a PowerPoint overview presentation. I can see the people that are working on that project. And I can also see common resources like documents. Now, if you don't like this page, you can certainly edit it. It's just a SharePoint page. You can edit it like any other page and personalize it. And then you can also add resources. Now, all of these topics are following the security and compliance principles of Office 365. So if you don't want a topic to appear like this, maybe it's a super confidential project, you don't have to, it won't show up. If it's, let's say your confidential project is marked as a confidential site, you can configure Project Cortex to not show any topics from confidential sites. So, you can rest assured that everything will be okay. So then the other thing that Project Cortex does is creates a knowledge center. So the knowledge center is a new site template that will be available in SharePoint. And what it does is it takes all of these topics that it's mined across Office 365, and it tries to show what it thinks is most useful to you using those signals that you fed into the Office graph. So for example, it thinks that maybe these projects and topics are the most interesting to me, so it shows it on the home page. It also shows my contributions to the Knowledge Center and my expertise. Shows how many questions I answered in Yammer. And then it also has pulled in that Q&A from Yammer to help, to suggest questions I might be able to answer or suggest documents that might be interesting to me, kind of like Delve used to do, or still kind of does, but it's way more powerful. So all of this together is building kind of a graph of topics in your organization, how they fit together, where, the most actions happening, like where things are trending. And then it's showing how related things are together. So if I'm starting with the core project, I can see that Project SOAR and Mark 8 are more highly related to that. And then the geothermal data visualization and GIS mapping projects are like 2 degrees away from that, so on and so on. So I can see the relationships between these projects. I can click on them to go to their topic pages and learn more information. I can use the Knowledge Center to view topics I might be interested in. And you're really kind of bringing everything together in a cohesive map of knowledge in your organization. Now, with that, we do have about 5 or 10 minutes. So I would like to show you a little bit more in-depth demo about how this works. So really quick, if you go to the Project Cortex Tech community page, which I just find honestly by searching for Project Cortex in Google or Bing, and then this is the first page that comes up. If you scroll to the bottom of the page, you click on demos. These are click-throughs that anybody can access. So if you want to check it out later, this is available to you. So I'm going to start out by showing a live demo of, well, it's a click-through demo of what topics might look like. So in addition to being on SharePoint pages, here's my email inbox. I can see that that acronym is being highlighted in my email. I click it and I can see the card, which shows me, who's involved in the project and a summary. I can suggest edits. I can follow topics. I can see resources, related topics, and then project details. Now, if I go to a SharePoint page and I scroll down a bit, you can see same thing, it's been automatically highlighted. I click on that and I see a very similar topic card. If I click on the name of the topic card, I'm brought to that Knowledge Center page about the project, the overview, the people. I have documents that I've been explicitly added to the page by a human. I have discovered content, which the AI algorithm guessed I might be interested in. I have that map of related topics that I showed you earlier. And then I have the Yammer questions and answers about the topic as well. If I go to my topics, this is where I see the knowledge topic cards, my profile. And then again, this Knowledge Center is just a SharePoint page, so you can edit it however you'd like. There's new knowledge web parts that will be released with Cortex that you can add throughout your other SharePoint pages as well as to the Knowledge Center site. So things like trending topics, finding experts, a feed of suggested topics based on the signals that you've sent to the graph, the knowledge graph viewer, which is that circle diagram, expert answers, etc. There's lots of options available. So that's a more in-depth look at the knowledge information. So since we have time, I want to jump back to a topic we discussed in the first section, which is where we were using the AI builder functionality in Power Apps to extract metadata from a form. Since this is something that you can do today and that will be available in the integrated with document libraries in the future with Project Cortex, I want to show you what that looks like. So here I'm just in a normal SharePoint site, and I'm going to go ahead and click and create a new document library. In this document library, I'm going to store purchase orders. So now with Project Cortex, I have this new option in the ribbon called AI Builder. If I click on that, it's going to bring me to this forms processing option that's available in, well, now it's Power Automate, not Power Apps. And I'm going to create an AI model for purchase orders. So to do that, I need to have 5 or 10 examples of what the document has, what a purchase order looks like. Now, they need to have the same layout. That's really important. So I'm going to go ahead and select a bunch of purchase orders. I'm going to upload them to the AI builder. And then I'm going to select the fields that I want to save from the form. So here, AI Builder has suggested some fields that it seems like I might want to save. So for example, the vendor's name and address. By clicking on it, I added a field over here. I also might want to know the date of the purchase order, or any of these things really. So here it's pulled out a lot of the things it thinks are interesting. this is my model summary where I have the fields that I selected. I'm going to click train down here. It's going to take some time, maybe like sometimes it's half a day, sometimes it's a day. And now I have my, my model. So I can test that model and make sure it actually works, or I could click publish to have it appear in the library. So then I'm going to create a flow that actually processes files when they're added to the library. So there's a template for the flow that's already built for you that you'll just modify for your situation. And now that I have a flow and I have a data model, when I click upload and I add these documents to the library, it automatically pulls those fields from the form that I designated and puts them as metadata in a library. So why is this important? Well, let's say that I want to apply one type of retention label to contracts that are less than $5,000, so like these ones here, and then I have a different retention period for contracts over 5,000 euros. That would be this one. I can read the metadata and do that automatically. Or let's say that you then wanted to automatically process the payment to that vendor. By using Microsoft Flow, you have the address of the vendor already nicely formatted, and you could integrate that with your checks processing system to automatically mail it to the correct location without an end user having to manually input that address. Those are just two examples, but the possibilities are really endless. Okay. So I want to make sure we leave time for questions. So I'll go ahead and kind of summarize the most important points from the presentation today. So any investments that you make now in Office 365, whether that's filling out metadata, whether that's getting the sensitivity labels deployed so that when things start showing up in Project Cortex, you're not surfacing the highly confidential terms on accident. Anything that you do now is going to really pay off in the future. As much as you can, get structured content into the Office graph, because the higher of the quality of the content you're putting into, I should say Microsoft graph, the higher quality you're going to get out of it. So garbage in, garbage out, quality in, quality out. Really focus on getting your security and protection in place now, so that if you decide to use something like Project Cortex or any like future AI stuff that Microsoft releases that they haven't even announced yet, everything is going to integrate with the sensitivity labels and the retention labels by default. So if you start now with classifying sites and documents as confidential or public, that means that you're not going to accidentally surface a highly confidential site or term or project in any of these other solutions. So start doing that now. And then, I get asked this almost every week. No, metadata and content types are not dead in Office 365. In fact, they're very much alive, and it is well worth your time to take another look at that if you're not using it already, or go through and inventory your terms, make sure they're all still accurate and up to date. That is well worth your time today, even if the new version isn't released for another 6 months. So with that, I'm always happy to answer questions. You can contact me on Twitter. Feel free to email me. I also have a blog where I frequently talk about these types of topics at howtouseoffice365.com. So yeah, please don't hesitate to reach out. But with that, let's go ahead and look at what questions we have from the webinar.
Great. Thanks for a great presentation, Erica. Yes, we will now start the questions and answers part. And should you wish to ask a question, type it into the questions window now. Okay, first question. What are some tips for making sure content remains fresh in Office 365 and useful to the end user?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, first of all, I would use those retention and deletion policies. So that will make sure that, not only are you keeping things for as long as you need to, but you're deleting things when they've reached the end of their period of being useful. So, for example, you could say if a content or if a document hasn't been modified for 3 years, then go ahead and delete it or send it to an archive location. The same thing is available for Teams and SharePoint sites, where you can say, if no one has had any activity in a team in a year, then put it all into read only and put it in an archive state, because that signals to search that it isn't important anymore.
Okay, brilliant. Next question. Can you show us the reference for the detailed knowledge center information?
The reference for the detailed. Okay, so I'm gonna guess that means where is it coming from?
Hmm.
So the automatically generated page is going to pull from any information available about that project. So you might have a business case that you wrote for the project. Well, that's in a document that's stored in, say, the project's site. So Cortex will look at the introductory paragraph of that document and determine it's the most relevant, because when the most people opened that document and read that first paragraph and then closed the document, and it'll automatically pull that onto the page. Now, that might not be the right answer, and in that case, you would click edit the page, and you would either edit that description or put in a completely new description. So the AI is just taking its best guess based on Office files and information that's stored in Office 365.
Okay. Next question. What do you mean by putting in graph? If the graph is activated, will it automatically be collected? Will it automatically be collecting data or not?
That's a great clarification. So yes, it is automatically collecting the information. So what I mean by putting it in the graph is, if you have a file, put it in SharePoint instead of Box or Dropbox. Or if you are recording meetings in Microsoft Teams, as an administrator, turn on the ability to automatically generate a transcript. So it's making those little choices that add additional knowledge where possible.
Okay. How do you implement metadata with MS Teams?
Great. Another great question. So when we're talking about metadata in Microsoft Teams, we're usually talking about the documents, because you wouldn't probably really put metadata on a conversation. So in that case, the documents are actually stored in a SharePoint library behind the scenes. So if you're doing the things that we spoke about in this webinar to add metadata to your SharePoint documents, then Teams is getting the benefit of that. Now, if you want to actually show the document library with the metadata in Teams, I can't remember if it's been released yet or it's about to be released, like in the next couple weeks. The new document library view will show both the documents and the metadata in a tab from the SharePoint library.
Okay. And the same person has just put in a note saying, but Teams does not give option to supply metadata on file upload.
Well, yeah, you're right. It's not going to prompt you to add the metadata. If it's required metadata, it's going to uh, show a little symbol next to the file saying, hey, something is missing. It's like a little yellow triangle with an exclamation point in it. And you would then need to go into SharePoint and fill that out or something to resolve that. I don't know that. I mean, I'm sure they're going to fix that because it is a common request, but I'm not aware of any timeline that they've announced around adding that feature. But it
Okay.
is a very common request.
Okay. Next question. How can the gathered knowledge center be combined with more deliberate entries into a knowledge base?
Yeah, so if you want to deliberately add things, like either from your your project taxonomy or anything like that, you can feed those topics into the Knowledge Center and either have it, let's say you have Project Falcon. If you enter that term into the Knowledge Center, and then the AI will go look for things related to Project Falcon and try to automatically create a page for you. Or you can just manually create the page yourself if you have very specific things that you want to show and curate. So yes, you can add your own curated terms to the Knowledge Center. You can also remove the automatically generated ones if you don't like them. It's completely customizable and flexible.
Okay. What you talked about is fantastic, but does it require the highest license model, i.e. E5?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the things that I spoke about that require E5 are, well, so they haven't announced Project Cortex licensing yet. So they have said it's going to be a premium license, but what we don't know yet is whether it'll be included in E5 or a separate license like they did with the Power Automate suite. So yes, it's probably going to be a little more expensive. They did tell us that the refresh of the managed metadata and content types will be available to everyone, including E3, but there might be some advanced features that are a part of that refresh where you would need the advanced license. Besides that, like a lot of the stuff we talked about where we're auto-completing metadata, where we're, doing the Yammer Q&A, the stream transcription, that stuff's in there. So you can use a lot of that today with any license.
Okay. And a second license question is, what license is needed for Project Cortex? Is it the same?
Yeah, we don't know yet. It's either they've said it's going to be a premium license, and we don't know if that means it'll be added to E5 or it'll be a standalone license, such as with the Power Automate is a standalone license.
Okay. And Erica, you have your contact details there on screen. So if somebody's watching this later on, not live, they can reach out to you.
Yeah, please do.
Okay, brilliant. Erica, on behalf of the ESPC community, thank you, Erica, for taking the time today to complete this webinar. We really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and thank you everybody for joining.
Brilliant. Thank you, Erica. Okay, I'll just get this wrapped up. Just bear with me here for one moment as I come back to sharing my screen. And I'll just change the presenter to me. Okay, this is the end of the webinar today. Please see sharepointeurope.com for further details of all upcoming webinars or visit our resource center. Don't forget, by the way, just in case you haven't noticed this already, that ESPC Call for Speakers is currently open and is closing on the 12th of March. And also we have a 30% ticket discount offer, which ends tomorrow, Thursday, the 27th of February. So make sure you get online and register today to avail of that discount code. Join us for our next webinar next month. Details are on screen. And thank you again to Erica Telly for joining us today. Take care and goodbye.